Good morning, everyone. This is Debbie, and welcome to the Sane Progressive. One of the ways that we're going to be effective in creating political change is breaking free of the false narratives that drive our strategy. One of the narratives that I see consistently in a lot of the writings and on social media with various pundits, one of the main talking points that you see all the time, one of the most common, is that the Democratic Party doesn't get it. They don't get it. The Dem establishment is clueless. The Democratic establishment doesn't understand why they keep losing elections. The Democratic Party just doesn't get it. That's not what's going on. And it's so insidious that I felt like I had to say something about it, because there's two articles this morning that just reflect this. One article is Bernie Sanders, Poor Americans, Democratic Party blames Trump voters, and this is from The Observer. And the tagline on this particular article is, quote, "The Democratic Party is blind to its own failures." And the second article that I'm seeing with this, if I can find it. This one is all over. This actually is an article that everybody keeps sending to me. And this is probably the biggest perfect example of what I'm talking about, from Sean King. The Democratic Party doesn't get why it's so unpopular. All right. Yeah, they do, guys. The Democratic Party totally gets this. They totally know that 14 million people left since November. They totally know that they had to friggin' cheat the primary so that Hillary Clinton could win. They totally know that the entire country, both red and blue, libertarians and green, are in a highly anti-establishment mode. They have pollsters, they have people who survey to give them all this information. They know the mood of the country. They're totally aware of it, totally aware of what the American people want. Okay? The Democratic Party, it's not that they don't understand the mood of the people. It's that they don't give a shit about the mood of the people, because the Democratic establishment and people in Washington, 98% of them are multimillionaires who are there to whore themselves out, to be the front puppet of the corporate and military industrial state. That is why they are there. They have sold themselves out, and they have infiltrated this establishment corruption, and I've talked about this repeatedly through my coverage of the election fraud, is at the local, the state, and the national level. And it isn't just a corruption of the of just the top level of the party. As I ran for delegate, I had people trying to cheat me out of a win and throw out my votes, because we had people trying to masquerade as Bernie Sanders supporters who were actually Hillary Clinton, who was trying to win the position of delegate. It is a systematic, festering corruption of the Democratic Party. So their aim, the Democratic Party's aim, isn't to win more elections to represent the people. They don't want to do that. The Democratic Party's aim is to keep their gravy train a-rolling down the tracks and keep their establishment position in place. That's what their goal is. That's why you get empty, mealy-mouthed rhetoric, always identity politics that doesn't actually represent marginalized or majority or minority people. Rather, it represents it only serves to represent their own interests, as they use minority populations, they use the LGBTQ populations, they use any social issue to pivot, to differentiate themselves. But at the core of it, they are a neoliberal, warmongering puppet party of the war machine and the friggin' corporate state. And everybody wants to take this party back, a failed strategy. It's failed. It's failed. 30 years, every group, every politician, every attempt to move back and to take the power back from the party from within has always, 100% of the time, been co-opted right back to the establishment, and you see it now. You see it now. It's massive. All the efforts. Our revolution comes up. Bernie Sanders is going to create our revolution. What do you see from our revolution? It is a group that immediately becomes co-opted by billionaires, right? That's why Nick Brana left. That's why all of the Bernie Sanders people who believed in raising money outside of the billionaire system, the core tenet of Bernie Sanders fundraising, left the organization. And now it's controlled once again by billionaire money interest, and it's going around and it's starting to endorse our progressive candidates. Because co-opt, that's how you co-opt. Co-opt. And until people get this is deliberate. And I do not want to hear anybody telling me about how we need to follow Bernie Sanders and follow his lead and go back to this Democratic establishment party. It needs to end. You have got to stop following that Pied Piper to the establishment. Because Bernie Sanders may have good domestic policies, but Bernie Sanders will never be successful in being able to move forward with his agenda to get these policies passed, because in order to get the policies passed, you have to address the corruption and the fraud. That's the obstacle, that's the wall. The usurped election systems, the completely fraudulent election systems. We just had an entirely fraudulent Democratic primary, which tens of thousands of people signed a petition to Bernie Sanders asking him to intervene and make a statement, which he has totally ignored. And I'm not putting that down, Senator Sanders. I'm showing up at your office. I'm really done with you ignoring tens of thousands of people who demanded you respond to this, Senator Sanders, and then you refuse to even give an answer to me when I question you. You don't take $270 million from people, Senator Sanders, and then fail to protect the vote. I'm coming with that petition, and you will answer to it one day. Because right now what Senator Sanders is doing, why people still follow this person is beyond me, and use him as an example of leadership. The man is actively lying about the Russian narrative and the fact that Russia intervened in our election. Not only is this Russia propaganda incredibly dangerous, resurrecting a Cold War, and it's one of the mechanisms that the Democratic Party is using in their pseudo fight against Donald Trump, because it's a pseudo fight. Do you know why you see the Democratic Party only fighting Trump on this Russia bullshit? Well, they fight and they haven't filibustered one damn cabinet appointee. Do you know why you see that? Because Democrats are neoliberals who stand very much in alliance with the corporate state and the military industrial complex, which Donald Trump serves. And they have variations, but they are all traitors to the people in the way they serve them. So they use the Russia bullshit and use this kind of propaganda narrative to pretend that they are actually fighting for the people when they stand in alignment with 95% of it. All right? So when you have Bernie Sanders actively shoveling you bullshit, he's shoveling you bullshit in a narrative that originated with the DNC and the Department of Homeland Security last summer. We've already gone through this a million times. That is a propaganda narrative. It has been used to usurp our elections and give the Department of Homeland Security control over the critical infrastructure of our elections, and to further privatize them, and to further make it a more secret Gestapo process. All right? So Bernie Sanders is in effect shielding the corruption, shielding the fraud of the Democratic establishment, who cheated his supporters out of $270 million and the win that we actually had. And he is lying to you to cover this up. I don't want to hear about him anymore. You think somebody who will actively lie, and he is, and he knows he's lying. The things that he is spewing are not true. They are not factually true. Overwhelming evidence that Russia interfered with our election. No, No evidence, zero tangible evidence, none, only shadow claims from the CIA. That's all we have. And now we know those digital fingerprints that Hillary Clinton DNC hired private contractors have been trying to put out as evidence. The CIA has the ability to plant those, according to the WikiLeaks. They have an entire library. But Senator Sanders shills the line. And when he shills that line, he is shielding the corruption and fraud of the Democratic Party. And when he shields the corruption and fraud of the Democratic Party, he protects them. And when he protects them and he protects the establishment, he makes it impossible for all those wonderful policies that he gives lip service to ever come to fruition. Because we will not get those policies in unless we can get officials in and politicians in that are elected to it. Where is his outrage on the Department of Homeland Security taking over our elections and the critical infrastructure? I called his office for a statement on that. I was hung up on. You know how many times the Bernie Sanders office has hung up on me in response to my legitimate questions around this? About the fact that he did nothing and allowed the certification of results in Arizona with the testimony of the Secretary of State saying election fraud occurred in that primary? I'm not going to get into documenting the hundreds of examples, and I'm talking hundreds of documented, proven examples of how that election was a total fraud. And Bernie Sanders protects it. And these Democrats are frauds. This week I've seen dozens of articles, dozens of talking points from really good progressive pundits saying this. The Democratic Party doesn't get it. Oh, yes, they do. They understand it perfectly. And their goal is to keep you, the only thing they care about is keep us impotent to do anything else. That is all they care about. They care about keeping their establishment power position. And they neuter and they destroy any effort from within. From within. We have got to leave this party. We've got to leave this duopoly, this cesspool of a duopoly, and we have got to